people really recognize that profit over people will lose trust. Although we learn in marketing, and one of the first things we learn is that the ultimate goal of the business is to be profitable, and that's what the parents of marketing said like tens of years ago. But is it still applicable now? And do we have examples of brands that are actually built for that drive for change? And the answer is yes, but also the answer is not enough yet, but it is on the rise. So I'm going to show you one of my favorite brands now with an ad.
Let us tell you a little something about our chocolate bar. It's unequally divided, which is indeed difficult to share equally. However, it's going to stay that way because our chocolate tells an important story. Let us explain. Here's where 60% of all the world's cocoa comes from. There are lots and lots of cocoa plantations here, where cocoa farmers work incredibly hard for very little money, and where children are forced into doing illegal and dangerous work so that big chocolate companies can purchase cocoa for a low price in order to become even bigger and richer. So, as long as the chocolate industry is unequally divided, our bar will stay that way too. Tony's vision is 100% slave-free chocolate. Not just our chocolate, but all chocolate worldwide.
Right, a super interesting brand to look at. Now, are they perfect? No. Do they do the right thing? In my opinion, yes. So as a customer, I always have this in top of my head. Like yesterday I was making, so I saw this recipe of like chocolate croissant pudding and it looked amazing. And I was like, I really need to do this. And so my flatmate went to Sainsbury's and I was like, okay, can you get chocolate for this recipe? And then she got chocolate, she came back and I was like, oh, but this is not slave-free chocolate. I don't want it. You know, like because of this brand ingraining that it can be done that way. Now I'm very conscious of that. So it's really a brand convincing me. This was not on the top of my mind. Maybe I knew and I had some information about where cocoa comes from and how the supply chain looks like, but I didn't really study it. But this brand, because I follow it, really ingrained that in my mind. So that's really a brand as activist to one, the industry, and then to also customer perception, behavior, and opinion. So that worked for me, and I'm sure it works for loads of others, but it's still not the biggest brand. If you say chocolate, most people think, well, Cadbury or whatever, Milka chocolates and all that. But there are brands definitely that are becoming activists themselves. We've seen it for big brands as well, taking stands on different specific issues. Last year, we've seen loads, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. Now it was very interesting to look at what looks honest and what doesn't look honest. And the comment sections were amazing. Last year's comment sections were always a war zone because there was always pros and cons, and there was, as I said, damn if you do, damn if you don't for the big brands. So there was always a debate, very interesting. So that was, for example, Nike's. Now we can debate whether this looked like genuine communication or was it a big PR move. Pros and cons, it can be a long debate. I tend to like Nike, but again, they're not the best in means of a lot of things in their supply chain. So it's still not a very, let's say, very good example of being a super nice brand. Now, other brands that I really like, Oatly, maybe you've seen this, they're becoming more and more popular with their marketing. And if anyone is interested in guerrilla marketing, especially in the food industry, if anybody is, Oatly is a brand to watch. I love Oatly. So this is their ads. They're in London as well. I saw them in the Tube. Now they're doing this whole thing about are you stupid? The milk industry, lobby industry, and the lobbyist thinks you are. This comes from a whole debate whether in the US it was legal or not to name oat milk because the milk industry said because it's not milk, it should not be able to be called milk, so you have to call it drink. Now the problem is once you call it drink instead of milk, it's a different perception for the consumer. So they didn't want that because they said this is just plant milk. And so they did a huge campaign around it, getting petitions and all that. So milk, the term milk can be used in relation to plant-based milks as well. So they did that, they had petitions, they won. Finally, we can call it oat milk. It's all good. US people can call it. I think in the UK it was okay before as well. Quite different, like let's say legal settings, environments. But that was the thing. in the European Union as well, they had this, I love this. Do you know those little robot identifier thingies that they make you pick the bridges and the bicycles and whatnot? So they made you pick the milk, and it's like, okay, you're gonna pick the Oatly milk as well because that is milk, because the petition went through, and now we can name it like that. So it was a really cool example of activism from the brand itself. Now we can see this, for example, with Ben & Jerry's, which is another brand that usually takes stands, and I quite like their ethical marketing. Now Patagonia is at the core quite an ethical brand. I love Patagonia's messaging. It doesn't get more activist than saying the president stole your land. Like, it's literally, they were campaigning against President Trump. Now, I don't want to get political, but this is activism because it speaks towards a political agenda, which we're going to see brands having to do, because being non-political in today's world as a brand manager is going to suck the life out of you. I was marketing, communications, and for PR for a non-political organization, global. I had to deal with the most varied opinions ever. We put out support for Black Lives Matter. There was pros and cons. We put there for the pride flag. There was a huge backlash from specific countries where that is not the norm yet. We talked about some issues. There were people pro and against, and people just don't accept you not taking the stand and being vague. Long gone are the days of vague PR statements. You have to back it up and say, you cannot just say, we believe in equality. Okay, how? What are you doing? What are your internal policies? Where are you donating your money? How does your supply chain look like? What charities are you supporting? How much money have you donated? All of these questions should be in your head before you put it out on social media, because if they're not in your head, then they're on the consumer's head, and there's going to be in your comment section. So you either ask those questions before, or they're going to be questions in your comment section, and then it's going to be a case of brand and reputational crisis management, which is a beautiful area, which I love, but is not for everyone.